All right. Hey, that's a little bit of Jeff Doreen, and that's Blackbird sung in Mohawk. So I know I haven't played this in a while, and welcome to Resistance Radio. Hey, I'm flying solo here. No Regan DeLoggins today. And today's a little bit a different show. We aren't broadcasting on WBI, but we are still broadcasting on WPFW, and of course we are Facebook live streaming as well. I want to remind people that although Resistance Radio is a radio show, it is also a podcast, and I also want to remind people that my Let's Talk Native podcasts are also available. So if you search Resistance Radio with John and Regan, or Let's Talk Native with John Kane, you will find us. So you can go to Linktree slash Resistance Radio, and you can find us, or you can go to Linktree slash Let's Talk Native, and you can find our podcast, and you'll see all the links to all of the platforms. All right, so all the run up to the inauguration, and of course all the drama associated with it, with the attack on the Capitol and all that other stuff. And I realize that there is a real sense of euphoria that people are feeling, not just to get to the inauguration, but because of 4 years of Trump. I think, as much as, there may have been, 75 million people who voted for Trump, there were 81 million people who voted against him. And I say it that way because I don't know how enthusiastic people were about voting for Biden. I mean, I don't know if that pendulum swing from Trump satisfied everybody, but there was no question that out of the 81 million people who voted for Biden, many of them were voting against Trump. And so part of the sense of euphoria is Trump leaving office amongst the people who were so hyped up about Trump leaving. And for me, I've got to curb some of that enthusiasm, because Trump leaving office doesn't solve the problem. Like I said, there's 75 million people who still support Trump. And regardless of whether Trump ever runs again, and if they impeach him and prohibit him from ever, convict him with an impeachment and prohibit him from ever running again, there's something that started there. And the role that Trump may or may not play in the next election or through this next 4 years. Look, he tweeted and managed to incite a riot at the Capitol, an attack on the Capitol. And look, and I'm not going to get into the whole venerable nature of a building, but the temple of democracy and all that other stuff. Look, it's just a building. The more significant is that a half a dozen people died as a result of this whole thing, and that should be the biggest concern. But so I want to spend today talking a little bit about curbing some of that enthusiasm. And I'm not, this isn't about me spending an hour bashing Joe Biden or, Kamala Harris or anybody else. But I think we have to put this stuff into perspective. And this isn't the time for calm. Look, we could argue that really trying to press issues and demonstrate and protest and, direct action may not have had the effect in a Trump administration that many of us would have liked to have seen, because it got met with so much resistance from Proud Boys and white supremacists and all that other stuff, which oftentimes crossed over to police officers and everything else. We may not we weren't going to affect change in a personality like Donald Trump. The question is, can we do it with somebody like Joe Biden? Look, I'm not going to dismiss the fact that he's, assembled a diversified, cabinet and has put people of color and transgender and, black and brown and native and people in places. But there's a certain part of me that gets concerned about that being tokenism. And, so I know that comes off as somewhat offensive. But if all you do is put a Deb Haaland in the Interior Department, but the voices of Native people still are not being heard, look, there's some major problems that Native people are facing today. And Deborah Haaland should know how to address some of them. She was involved in Native gaming in New Mexico. New Mexico is one of those states where the state is extorting money out of them for gaming revenue. What started out as this concept of revenue sharing, where a state offers a major concession to Native people that can bolster their business, and sometimes it's exclusivity or something like that, where they offer something of value, and then the Native gaming operation shares a portion of revenue with the state. That sounds all good, but it didn't end up that way. Now it's turned into literally extortion, because what Native gaming operations have been facing is that if you don't continue to pay us, and we're going to ramp that up, sometimes 25% of the net slot drop in cases like here in Seneca territory. I mean, significant. The Senecas have literally paid New York State $1.5 billion. They have $500 million sitting in escrow that they're trying to stop from having to pay the state, and the state wants another $500 million on top of that. So it'll be $2.5 billion that the state pulls out of Native territory. Now that may not be a lot of money to New York State, but it's a hell of a lot of money to Native people. And so the effort to try to stop these revenue sharings gets confronted with the prospect of a state saying, well, look, you want to pull away your revenue sharing agreements? Then we're not going to renew your compact. And there's so little information about what that would mean. I mean, some are fearful that if a state doesn't renegotiate a compact with Native people, that their casinos would have to close. And many of these Native territories have, basically have become dependent on that gaming revenue. Revenue that has clearly been affected by COVID-19, by the way. So our territories are really struggling. Is Kamala Harris, is Deb Haaland going to address that? I don't know. I mean, all of the conversations thus far relating to Deb Haaland has been, over environmental things, Bureau of Land Management and that kind of stuff. Lots of hype over Joe Biden signing an executive order canceling the permit for Keystone XL pipeline. And that's a good thing. But I have to temper that with the fact that most of that pipeline was built during the Obama-Biden administration. It was approved at the tail end of Bush, but it was built. And most of the fast tracking through the Army Corps of Engineers and all that other stuff, most of that happened during Obama-Biden. It wasn't until 2015 that the Obama administration put the brakes on it. And basically, the only reason they could put the brakes on it is because it crosses an international border, and that's where the State Department comes involved. But they could have opposed it from the very start, and then the thing would have been built. So now canceling a permit doesn't stop the use of Keystone pipeline, and it doesn't undo all of the building that's been done thus far. So it concerns me. I mean, canceling a permit is one thing. Pulling up the pipeline, much of which goes through Native territories or at or about Native territories, yeah, that's something else. And keep in mind also that whole debacle over Standing Rock and the battle over the Dakota Access Pipeline, that was entirely during Obama-Biden. So, I liken some of this to the idea of somebody jamming a stick in your eye and then wanting to get praised when they pull the stick out. You still got the hole in your eye. So this is among the things that I think need to be discussed in terms of trying to curb the enthusiasm. Because this really started to look, with all its pageantry and everything else, a lot less like a party like they've been in the past, and a lot more like some sort of religious, sacrament or something like that. Of course, there's all the Bible and all the church stuff that gets in. And, I hear some of the cries that say, well, there's supposed to be a separation of church and state. Well, technically, the separation of church and state is not codified as much as people think it is. Basically, what it says is that in the U.S. Constitution that the government will not be involved in religious expression, and they will not prohibit or have a state religion. It doesn't mean that we aren't going to be inundated with a whole lot of religion and religious overtones. So these are the kind of things that, as I witness them as a spectator, and I have to say again, I don't vote in U.S. elections. I'm not an American. I'm Gunyagahag. I'm Mohawk. So to a large extent, I am a spectator, but not an affected spectator. Obviously, what happens in the United States and Canada and frankly, some of the global stuff clearly affects me. So I do have an interest, but I am not, what I say, kind of, sarcastically is it's not my circus and these aren't my clowns. And honestly, as I watch some of this stuff, and then as I see this, exuberance that has been expressed with Obama coming to office, or I'm sorry, with Biden coming to office, part of it seems to be suffering from amnesia. Are we recognizing some of what Joe Biden has stood for, some of what Kamala Harris has stood for, some of what some of these other people that he's put into his cabinet have stood for? There's lots of conflict of interest, with some of his people as well. And that doesn't just go away with the euphoria over Trump leaving. And again, I'll say it multiple times through the program. It also doesn't make those 75 million people, half of which actually supported the attack on the Capitol. So we aren't out of the woods here, and I say we, I mean everybody. And I think anybody who thinks that this is like, some rebirth, and look, we can talk about unity all we want. And my concern about talking about unity is, look, you have Trump, going way out on the pendulum swing, and the response isn't a pendulum swing back the other way, equal and opposite. It's centrist, it's moderate, and again, we just went through Martin Luther King Day, and his letter from Birmingham where he talks about the biggest stumbling block to freedom are the moderates, white moderates. That still holds true today, and let's be honest. I mean, Biden is, the epitome of white moderate. And it doesn't matter how many people of color he puts around him. It doesn't change. Look, these people, regardless of where they come from, and regardless of their ancestry, by the time you've reached this level of elevation within the party system of the United States, you have become party. I heard a lot of conversation about the congresspersons who voted, to certify the election. Oh, and the two Democratic congresswomen from one from New Mexico and one from Kansas, they certified, but the three Republican native congresspersons, one woman again from New Mexico and two men from Oklahoma, they stood with the Republicans who wanted to challenge the legitimacy of the election. So why is that? Well, it's party line. These people they're just following their party's line on this stuff. We have to sometimes question, are they bringing their ancestry with them to this office, or are they bringing their indoctrination to the party? American, Democrat, Christian, all of these things that really are not a part of who we are. It's a part of who they are. And again, I say this all the time about Deb Haaland. I didn't vote for her. In fact, almost no Native people voted for her in the overall scheme of things. We aren't a very big population in the first place, so let's be clear about that. But if you look at how she got elected in New Mexico, it was white people. She endeared herself to the party. And, she worked for the party. Look, she managed one of the Laguna Pueblo businesses or organizations associated with gaming, but she didn't serve the Laguna Pueblo people as a politician or as a leader, but she had a job there. Her family is military. She's a Catholic and she's a Democrat. And her ancestry, she didn't grow up there, and I got to be clear, she didn't grow up in Laguna Pueblo. I'm not saying she didn't have any contact there, but so what does she bring to Washington? Does she bring party loyalty? I mean, and look, don't get me wrong, she does have some interest in advancing Native issues, but when they come into conflict with the administration And national interest, she's serving national interest. She serves at the pleasure of the president. All of these cabinet members do. And it'll be Biden and to some extent Harris that'll determine what line that these people have to take are. They're not independent. This isn't like a different branch of government. This isn't like the judiciary or the legislative branches of the government. This is all executive branch. This is all Biden. So again, I've got to remind people that all this enthusiasm about Trump leaving, Biden isn't the answer all by himself. And he may not be the answer at all. Especially if we all get complacent, if we stop with our direct action, if we stop protesting, if we stop being heard, if we stop making noise. Now is the time to be as loud as you've ever been. Now is the time to take the streets. And yeah, I know people are going to be concerned. Well, even the left and the right might be on the same page when it comes to stopping demonstrations after what happened to the Capitol. Isn't that funny how that works out? There's all this aggression towards Black Lives Matter or pipeline protests, and where people are beaten and pepper sprayed and shot with non-lethal armaments, and they're predominantly peaceful protesters. Then you get all these white guys, going into, breaching the Capitol security and, beating up, cops that they claim to be supporting through their Blue Lives Matter movement. And almost none of them, one person got shot. And, and look, for the most part, they're going to say that one person who got shot was a mistake, shouldn't have ever happened. And I'm not saying I disagree with that. But I guarantee if those people were people of color, there would have been more than one shot fired or struck somebody anyway. So now we in this post, insurgency, as they call it, or insurrection, whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of conversation about, how much the government is going to crack down on civil unrest. And we end up being the victims of that crackdown. Look, these Proud Boys and these white supremacists, they're going to do what they're going to do. And nobody's going to, they won't crack down on those guys. Not really. But when we take to the street, you're going to see cops, cracking skulls, just like we've always seen. Whether it's an old white man being knocked, having his head cracked on the skull or his skull cracked on the sidewalk in Buffalo, or whether it's what the NYPD did to so many of those people that were protesting on the side of the street, including my own co-host Regan DeLoggins. Yeah, she got knocked off her feet by this big burly New York City police officer. She got right back into it, right back up. But this is what we experienced when we, and this is what we experienced before what happened at the Capitol. So I'm not going to apologize for not being so enthusiastic about this new administration. And what makes me less enthusiastic is all the enthusiasm. What concerns me is that being stuck in this euphoria means that we're just going to sit back and wait for Biden to fix everything. Biden and company to fix everything. And that's not the way it works. We have to be every bit as diligent. We have to be every bit as engaged. And we've got to be critical. We've got to be skeptical. We got to hold everybody to account. I mean, Trump is done. I don't care anything about Trump. I don't even need to talk about Trump. I am worried about 75 million people who still think he was just great. Yeah, that concerns me. But I'm going to tell you, if we think that it's been solved now and that the slate has been cleaned, no, it hasn't. We had problems before Trump. Trump didn't invent racism. He made it more okay to express it, but he didn't invent it. He didn't make it happen. He normalized it, but it was already there. That's why they voted for him in the first place. Look, Trump's ascendancy was due in large part to the fact that white people were pissed that a black man made it to the presidency. And it's crazy because you get Obama in office. And the right wing's response to Obama and Biden is Trump. And now, so what's the answer? The response the Democrats put to Trump, who's really taking things off the rails? Frankly, somebody that was even more centrist than Obama was. And Obama was pretty centrist. Look, and if you don't believe me, I can cite one good example of how little has changed. Among the first things that has been expressed by cabinet members and by Biden is their commitment to regime change in Venezuela. And why? Why? I mean, this is again this attack on a socialist country, and socialism hasn't failed Venezuela. What the international community, especially and including the United States, has done, they've made Venezuela's life miserable with their sanctions, with seizing accounts and money. Look, they've all but stolen Citgo, which was a part of their national oil company. And look, Venezuela threw the multinational oil companies out of their territory. Why? Because they were being raped for their oil. So they took it upon themselves. And have they ever got their production back to the level that let's say a Shell or Exxon or anybody else was able to get it to? Of course not. Why? Because they don't care about Venezuela. They care about production. And so this has been part of the effort. And look, you had the UK seize assets and hold some of their gold that they had banked. You had the United States interfering with trade. I mean, look, I think Venezuela was the 5th largest exporter of oil and petroleum products to the United States, and the United States put a kibosh on that. And of course, the oil revenue, the numbers dropped in the first place. So the price per barrel dropped so much that hurt Venezuela. But so when I see this administration coming out of the gate, not even hedging, I mean, just right out of the gate, saying, "Yeah, we're gonna recognize Juan Guaido, guy never been elected, and who happens to be very, very drawn to the United States, educated in the United States, speaks really impeccable English. He's even lighter skinned than Maduro and Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez. Look, we saw what the United States did in Bolivia by trying to endorse a coup, essentially. And look, I think they're still stinging because because the white lady that was trying to take over, that basically forced the ouster of Evo Morales, got defeated soundly in an election. So we're not seeing a dramatic change. When I heard people say, well, you have to understand that, when we talk about right and left, this is the right and left of wings of the same bird. Look, I'm not even saying that this is much of a left wing. When I consider what Biden has represented in terms of, crime bill and some of the racist comments that he's made, his own, hawkish style, of governance. I mean, look, while Biden was the vice president to Obama, there were more deaths by drone strikes than the United States has ever been responsible for. So killing people isn't, certainly that seems to be just as much a Democratic initiative, including, the assassination of Osama bin Laden, who they codenamed Geronimo, by the way. I had a lot of problems with what transpired during the Obama administration, and Biden was a part of that. So, should we expect something different from a Biden as from Biden as the president versus when he was the vice president? Look, I get it. He did appoint a diverse cabinet. I'll give you that. But diverse in terms of skin color, I'm not sure how diverse that cabinet is when it comes to ideology, because that's where the diversity needs to be, not in hair texture, gender, or gender preference or ethnicity. Ideology is where look. I'm not saying that you have enemies or adversaries necessarily in your cabinet, but you should have diverse thought, and diverse thought is not genetic, and it's not ethnic. Not really. I mean, I guess there is some cultural diversity, I guess, associated with ethnicity. But I get really concerned because of how excited people are. And look, I'm not trying to dash the excitement. Look, I think it's great that Trump is gone too. And so don't make any mistakes about that. I think Trump was terrible in any way you measure it. He was terrible. But I also hear people, and again I go back to the fact that that Monday was Martin Luther King Day. And keeping in mind that Martin Luther King talked about the three evils of America, of the United States: militarism, capitalism, and racism. That's what he called the evils. That's not what white people call the evils. Maybe racism, but militarism. Look, I've even heard people of color get all excited. Well, America's the number one main superpower, military dominance. Martin Luther King was opposed to that. I mean, hell, Dwight Eisenhower was the one who warned against the buildup of the military-industrial complex, because you get a tail wagging the dog issue. Look, if you don't carry a gun, you're not going to shoot somebody. And if you do carry a gun, you may say you're committed to not killing anybody with it, that it's only there for self-defense. But if it's there, Donald Trump said, well, what's the sense of having nuclear weapons if you're not going to use them? Well, the same thing can be said for a gun. You won't use it if you don't have it. If you have it, all of a sudden your perspective on what is self-defense and what is an appropriate use of that weapon, when you have it, you know that option of using it is on the table. Well, the same thing with military. When you put military in 70 other countries around the world, if any other country did that, the United States would lose its mind. I mean, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Look, I'm not advocating for nuclear weapons being assembled in Cuba. In fact, I don't advocate nuclear weapons. Period. Keep in mind that there's only one country that's ever used them, and that's the United States. But if any other country established bases around the United States, the way the United States does in all other parts of the world, the United States would lose its bloody mind. And at some point, this isn't peacekeeping. These aren't UN peacekeepers. This is U.S. military. And what's the U.S. military's objective? To advance the national interest of the United States. Now, they aren't the world's police. They don't have that moral authority. So they squeeze countries to allow them to, land their jets, port their battleships, lodge their men. 70 other countries. I mean, the military-industrial complex is far greater today than it was in the 1960s. All right, folks. We'll let me see. We'll take a break. We'll go out with a little bit more Blackbird, and then we'll come back with the second half of the show. All right. Thanks for coming back. This is John Kane again. That's Jeff Doreen Gorunyawage, who translates Beatles tunes and others to Mohawk and performs them. For those of you who have joined me in New York for some of my events, I've had Jeff Doreen join me and perform. Look him up online. You can find him. I think he's got a podcast as well, but you can look up Gorunyawage or Jeff Doreen. You can find him on YouTube as well. He turned his musical career into a teaching career, teaching language, and of course that's really essential to maintaining not just identity but our connection to the past. It is through language that we understand where we came from. Because we understand what those who formulated those words and those expressions, what they were thinking, because of understanding the etymology of that language. So again, I give my props to Jeff Doreen. All right, so again, curbing enthusiasm. There's a real opportunity, and I'll give that. There's a real opportunity to affect change. And, I am, like, as I said, I am concerned that because of what took place at the Capitol, all protesting and demonstrating and whatever may become under much more scrutiny and much more aggression. And when people of color have demonstrated, we've already been clearly have been beat on and oppressed and abused. And of course, the other thing I want to be clear: these things don't compare. Our spilling onto the streets or standing up to a pipeline is about protecting land. It's about protecting people. It's about opposing the injustice of death by cop. That's why we take to the streets. That's why we, form these blockades to stop the rail or stop the pipelines or frankly, to stop people from passing through our territories with COVID. I mean, a lot of these things we do to protect ourselves. Those folks who stormed the Capitol, some of them bought into a lie, and many of them believed it. But they went in there basically on the urging of one man, of Donald Trump, and the lies that he perpetuated. Look, I'm not a big fan of the U.S. electoral system. I mean, I'm not calling fraud. I'm saying it's designed to be flawed. The fact that you have the Electoral College, that you can win an election without winning the popular vote, and that you can win without the majority of the vote. I mean, back when Bill Clinton, beat George Bush, he didn't have 50% of the vote. No, I mean, because Ross Perot had taken some. In fact, take Ross Perot out of the mix, and Clinton might not have beat Bush in the first place. They don't do runoffs in the United States. Some states do. Georgia does, but not all elections do. And that's the thing about the United States. A different set of election standards and procedures for all 50 states. And that also demonstrates itself in the primary. I mean, look, by the time people go to vote in November, their choice has been whittled down by any number of processes that are really, really corrupt. And Bernie Sanders has experienced this in both runs for the presidency. And I'll give him credit. He carries himself well, even in the face of of being on not just losing, but having the party make sure that he loses, and that's part of the problem. So look, there are problems with the American election system, but those guys who stormed the Capitol, they're saying that flat out that Trump won, and that they thought they could somehow overturn the election. I mean, that's just bizarre thinking, and that's what Trump was calling upon to do. So I don't like the two things even being compared. And we can call them riots, and in some of the excuse me, some of the protests and the demonstrations that took place over Black Lives Matter did devolve into riot. But part of it is the frustration that we've lost our streets. The social contract that we've had with America as people of color has not been fulfilled. And you see it in the prison population, you see it in death by cop, you see it in poverty, you see it in unemployment, you see it in all kinds of opportunities. Look, I've said this before, but when Obama went to eulogize Nelson Mandela, he talked about the great opportunities that he and his wife Michelle have experienced, in reaching that pinnacle of political success as the president and first lady of the United States. But then he says, but there are still places in the world where young people have no prospects for the future. I said, hell, you don't have to go to Africa to say that. That exists in almost every urban environment in the United States. And then if you look at native territory, every native territory struggles with this idea. I mean, part of the reason we have the troubles we have is that our young people, frankly, our middle-aged people and our old people, we don't see any real hope for the future. Look, the biggest change agent, that native people have seen has been casinos. And that's not exactly, look, I'm not in love with that, but that's been the biggest vehicle for change in native territories. That and going right back to Osage, the Osage murders, when there have been natural resources discovered in our territory. And then we get screwed out of those things. Yeah, we get some money, pennies on the dollar. But in the 1920s, the Osage were the richest people in the United States, if not the world. And they were exploited to the nth degree. And that exploitation continues today. Look, shutting down the Keystone XL pipeline, there were native territories, so-called native leaders that were all about tar sands oil. Most native people opposed it. Most people with any kind of conscience would oppose it. The filthiest oil on the planet. And then having it piped through the United States to go to the Gulf of Mexico. And why? Why would it go to the Gulf of Mexico? Because all of those old, dirty refineries that could make the tar sands oil marketable were operating. They were grandfathered in ahead of the Clean Air Act, so they could still, bellow, choking fumes into the air because they were grandfathered in. All of that oil that was going to be traveling through that Keystone XL pipeline wasn't for U.S. domestic supply. It wasn't for Canadian domestic supply. It was for export. So Canada could sell the dirtiest oil on the planet to China primarily. And they were going to do that by Canada couldn't build refineries to process this stuff. Why? Because they've already instituted regulations. They couldn't build them because they would be too dirty. Just extracting tar sands oil is a filthy, dirty process that Canada has to look the other way in so many different ways to even allow. But they won't build refineries to refine tar sands oil. No, they'll figure out how they can set it down to the United States and into those Gulf states that have those old refineries that can still pollute. I mean, and I'm not saying anything new. Anybody who followed this, a decade ago or the last 2 decades, that's just what it is. So we do need to keep at it. We need to work. We need to do the good and solid work to make sure not just to rebound from Trump, but we needed to advance things during Obama-Biden that never got advanced. Look, during the Obama-Biden administration, they deported more people than any other administration before them. So let's not pretend that returning to the Obama-Biden era via Joe Biden solves all problems. Look, things weren't that great before. We had a high death by cop rate. In fact, many of the names that we talk about today, when we say their name, it isn't just Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. We can go right back to all these people killed during the Obama administration that nothing took place, nothing happened over. There's very little convictions that took place. So let's not pretend everything was great. Then. I mean, we can be as guilty as those people wearing those MAGA hats, make America great again. It was never great. And I got to tell you, when is it, what's the calendar day? What's the year that people, cling to when they say when America was at its finest? Well, when they've done polls, they've come up with dates like 1959, year I was born. It wasn't because I was born that year, but they'll say that was the best America's ever been. Post, World War II, they won't remind you. They won't tell you that the highest tax rate was in the 70s. 70% was the maximum tax rate. Something that Regan was very proud of himself for destroying. And of course, racism was rampant. I mean, residential schools were still functional. All of the things that we talk about today in terms of racism were much higher in the 1960s. Look, we're coming out of the civil rights battle. Look, it wasn't just black people couldn't eat at a lunch counter. There were signs that said "No Indians and dogs" hanging out in front of a lot of restaurants. No Indians or dogs. Native people couldn't list themselves as Native people. Now, I'll say it again. In many states in the United States, when they required somebody to fill in what race they were, you only had 2 choices, white or black. They wanted to Already in the 1950s, 1960s, and even the 70s, they wanted to dismiss our very existence, except for when they wanted to use us for mascots. So, look, there's a lot of work to do. And, can we move this administration? I don't know. Maybe. I hope. And I'm not saying it as an American. I'm saying somebody who's going to say, look, this is what you've done to my people. This is what you're doing to my people. And this is what we're trying to stop you from doing in the future. But I'm going to stand with the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm going to stand with, those opposing missing and murdered Indigenous women. I'm going to stand with the LGBTQ community. I'm going to stand, for women's rights, because we ain't there yet. I've got into this argument with people who say, well, we've advanced, a long way towards equality. Really? The last 4 years have demonstrated that to you? We've had a misogynist, a racist, a white supremacist that spewed his hate from the White House podium. Don't tell me we've come a long way. Women still aren't making the same amount of money that men do. And if you put a little color to those women, it gets even worse because people of color are disproportionately poor. We suffer from more substance abuse, more teen pregnancy, lower life expectancy. Even when we go to a hospital, this COVID pandemic, we're dying at a higher rate than any other people. And Native people higher than other people of color even. Why is that? Didn't the government promise health care to Native people in exchange for all the land they stole? Yeah, they did. And you know what they did with it? They put us all on welfare. So in order for our clinics to be funded, it's not funded from Indian Health Services the way people think it is. Because we represent living below the poverty line, they can just do it all through Medicare, Medicaid. We have to apply for Medicaid, or Medicare, whichever, I mix up the two all the time. We have to apply for that to get service in Native clinics. I mean, whether we qualify or not, is irrelevant. And if we don't qualify, that's where Indian Health Service will pick something up. I mean, the amount of money that New York State pays, per week, it's like $1 billion a week for Medicare. And, frankly, we shouldn't be among those. New York State shouldn't be covering our medical bills. The federal government should be doing it because that was the deal they made. Health, education, and welfare. As they screwed us out of land. And then failed to deliver health, education, and welfare. We are the least educated. We have the poorest health care. And, our welfare. Look, we live in substandard housing. We live in poverty. We have the highest, unemployment rates. Is that going to change during Obama? During Biden and Harris and Deb Haaland? I doubt it. Look, part of what the Interior Department does is it manages oil leases. It's part of the climate change problem. We'll see what happens. And look, we're going to use our loud and aggressive voices to try to affect change as much as possible. But when our voices don't work, we're going to do more than just cry about it. So, Biden might think that he's got, some sort of mandate from the people to do whatever he's going to do. No, you don't. The person who lost the mandate was Trump. But the rest of us, look, we have demands. We don't have. For me, it's not about expectations. It's about demands. I mean, because I don't need the United States to pass new laws. Look, it's illegal to rape or murder or kidnap a woman, but we still have missing and murdered Indigenous women. They have plenty of laws. They just don't enforce them when it comes to us. So therein lies the problem. What happens is we are still being dismissed as people that can be sacrificed. And, our populations are small. And to be clear, and I've talked about this on previous shows, one of the things that contributes to racism is democracy. Yeah, you heard it right. Democracy. Why would democracy contribute to racism? Well, democracy is based on majority rule. And in the United States, the majority of people are white. 62% of the United States is white. And even for those who can't consciously admit it, it is clear that controlling the systems of government and who is wealthy and who isn't, who has and who has not, that is still something that is tied closely to white supremacy, white privilege. And you only have to walk into the halls of Congress and see, look, it doesn't look like the demographics of the United States. It's not 13% black. It's not 50% women. Look, from a Native standpoint, we actually probably do have a higher percentage than our population in Congress, because we only represent about, especially living on, for Native people living on a territory, but we represent less than 1% of the United States. And of course, there are no Native senators. At least I don't think so, not at this point. But there still does remain 4 Native congressmen or congresspersons, 2 women, 2 men. Only one of those 4 is a Democrat. And like as I said earlier, you can, when you listen to some of these, they're all touting the party line. They aren't advocating. I mean, look, there's some lip service given to Native issues, but trust me, the ones in Oklahoma, that's another state where Native people are getting screwed out of gaming revenue. The governor, who also claims to be Native of Oklahoma, is trying to squeeze Native people for gaming revenue. We'll see if Deb Haaland, and you can be damn sure that those Native congressmen in Oklahoma aren't going to do anything to help. So this is why I say, let's look, enjoy the moment, I guess. Enjoy the moment. But let's curb some of that enthusiasm and let's save some of that energy for the real work that we have to do next. Because we have to do some serious work. And I think it's important that we remember that whether we are part of the United States or not, there is a relationship that Native people are still very much on the short end of with the United States. There are promises made and very few of them kept. The United States still does not fully embrace the minimum standard that the rest of the world put together in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And it's a pretty terrible document. I mean, it falls far short. I mean, it basically says in the document that it is the minimum standard for, welfare, for dignity and survival. That's what the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People says. Neither Canada or the United States will even embrace it. Because why? Because one of the main components, the main bar that is set by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is free, prior, and informed consent. Something that the U.S. and Canada have never even begun to approach when it comes to Native people. Nobody brought up the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People to Deb Haaland, as far as I know. And nobody's brought it up to Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or anything else. Nobody's brought up, will you commit to the standard of free, prior, and informed consent when it comes to legislation, policy, or procedures that affect or in any way affect or interfere with Native life? And they won't. And that's the minimum standard in the UN DRIP. The minimum standard. And what is so hard? If what you're doing is legit, then what's wrong with having free information, prior information, and then seeking our consent? And making sure that consent is really coming from us, not just from a few bought-off Native politicians. And that, yes, there are bought-off Native politicians. So that's why we all have to speak. I'm not just saying, let's send the, NCAI, the National Congress of the American Indian president or representative, to speak. And to the extent that Native people are still hiring all kinds of white people and lawyers and lobbyists and consultants to, to help advance pro-Native legislation, I don't need any pro-Native legislation. In fact, I just assume strip away some of the existing Native legislation because it's not so pro after all, including IGRA, the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. So there is much work to be done for all of us, Native people, Black people, people of color. Let's not rest on this. Let's not become complacent just because of the euphoria of Trump being voted out of office. And let's be painfully aware that 75 million people, 10 million more people voted for Trump in this last election than when he first got elected. That's a scary thought. But we should be aware of it. And look, we should try to figure out how we make peace with some of those people and draw some of these people out from underneath this cloak of racism. But we can't do it by accommodating them. We have to confront racism. Like I said, you're either racist or you're anti-racist. Because if you're not against racism, then you're complicit with racism. So that's my message for today. Look, enjoy your moment, but let's curb our enthusiasm and let's do the good work we've got to do going forward. That is what is really necessary, at this stage of the game. We really do have to. We really do have to make sure that we do right by our people and by our commitment. Thanks for listening. I'm John Kane. This is Resistance Radio.